Good morning. I'm Lloyd Priest, and I'm the chair of the HOC's Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. And I'd like to introduce to you the other member of this committee, Jeffrey Merkowitz, Commissioner. We're here this morning to review several items that have come before the committee brought by the staff, and we'd like to go ahead and proceed with the agenda. The first item is the approval of the minutes.
Would move that we approve the minutes of September 4th, 2024, both the open and closed sessions.
Properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of September the 4th, 2024. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. We have 4 items for discussion today. The first item on the discussion agenda is the fiscal year 2024 fourth quarter unaudited financial statements. And I will turn to our President, Chelsea Andrews.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the HOC team, and the public. We are presenting you with information as we reflect on our fiscal year 24. As you can see in the materials that we will go over with you today, our position continues to be strong in terms of financial position, but we are continuing to make our way through the impacts of COVID. You will see that we've highlighted where we have experienced some challenges in regards to rental revenue, as well as expenses related to turnovers and making sure that we move forward with lease enforcement. But you will also note that reflected in our materials are bits of information in regards to how we believe our financial position is turning around. And it will take some time for us to get there, but we are on our path forward. Our fiscal year reflects the fact that our financial health remains stable. In fact, our net position has increased. However, we did end the year with challenges as it pertains to meeting our budget. And so we want to talk about and share with you kind of how the year wrapped up, but also how we're going to position ourselves in 25 so that we can make sure that we continue to maintain the level of financial stability that we have, but also turn around the outcome moving forward. And so with that, I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, to provide additional insight and to work with his team through these various presentations.
Thank you, President Andrews. Commissioners, for the record, my name is Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. Before we go into this first item, I'd like to provide a brief overview of what to expect today. Today, the finance team will be presenting on 4 items, including the unaudited financial statements, budget to actuals, a budget amendment, and the write-offs for the 4th quarter. A common theme of these presentations is the importance of and our progress in the expeditious lease enforcement. This is again illustrated in the write-off packet, which reports a notable decrease in tenant write-offs, most of which relate to our property management division's success with lease enforcement. Total write-offs for the year were nearly 1.4 million, and this is an increase of over $1 million in each of the last 2 fiscal years. However, this quarter, Q4, the write-offs declined. Lease enforcement has been effective, and we will continue to closely monitor its impact. We are cautiously optimistic that after another 2 to 3 quarters, lease enforcement will normalize. In terms of our finance position, HOC's financial health remains stable. The agency ended the year with $2.1 billion in total assets, an increase of $106 million. And ended with a modest increase in net position of $222,000. Current and quick ratios are slightly down from the beginning of the fiscal year, but are healthy at about 3.5 and 3 to 1 respectively. HAP utilization is nearly identical as we started the year at 96%. Tenant arrearages continue to be an issue, and we're up $4 million in the year. The bright side, however, is that the increase was only $400,000 this quarter, which when we take a look at the trends over the last 2 years was the lowest increase in any quarter by at least a margin of 2 to 1, and in most cases 3 to 1. I'm sorry, this is just an
Overview.
overview before we
Okay.
get into that, just to kind of paint the picture. Reserves, including the general fund operating and property reserves, are stable. In the budget to actual packet, staff will recommend an option to close the FY 24 budget that maintains this stability. A review of our 9 revolving funds also demonstrates stability and are projected to improve with upcoming commitment and development fees. The budget to actual packet provides details of slippage in these fees. However, it is important to note that the FY 25 budget assumes 20 million in commitment and development fees. However, we are now projecting 25 million in commitment and development fees. A large driver, as the president alluded, is
What does that compare to this year?
this year, I think we were projecting about 8 or 9. We received about 4 to 5.
Okay.
A large driver of next year's performance will be the timing of commitment and development fees, and especially property performance, specifically our ability to maximize rent collection, minimize vacancy, and find effective solutions for the rising maintenance and utility costs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or to move on to the first packet item. Okay. With that, presenting the first item, which is the fiscal year 2024 fourth quarter unaudited financial statements, is our controller, Eugenia Pascal. Eugenia?
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, commissioners, HOC staff, and viewing public. For the record, my name is Eugenia Pascal, controller. Kindly scroll to page 10. As of the fiscal year ended June 30, 24, the commission's total assets amounted to 2.1 billion, an increase of about 107 million from 2 billion in fiscal year ending June 30, 23, with a corresponding increase in total liabilities. The commission's net position did not materially change from the last fiscal year's balance of 296.8 million, reflecting a nominal increase of 222,000 attributed to the fiscal year 24 net operating income. The liquidity ratios are slightly lower this year than last year, but still within the healthy levels. The current ratio was 3.46 in June 24, as compared with 3.63 in June 23. Whereas the quick ratio was 2.98 in June 24 as compared to 3.30 in June 23. The net increase in total assets, excluding the deferred outflows, is mainly due to the following: an increase in restricted long-term investments, partially offset by a decrease in restricted cash and cash equivalents, attributed primarily to the investing activities of the undrawn bond proceeds from the multipurpose bonds issued for the HOC headquarters, the Housing Production Fund, and MHDB bonds, along with mortgage-backed securities transactions under the Single Family Fund. An increase in mortgage and construction loan receivables from several component units due to additional draws from the real estate line of credit and the OHRF, primarily at the Willow Manor, Elizabeth House 3, Wheaton Gateway, Westside Shady Grove Building B, Hillendale Gateway, Shady Grove, and Georgian Court. This is partially offset by the payoff of the REAC loans of Upton 2 and Stewarttown. The multifamily bond fund also contributed to the increase due to the mortgage receivables related to the new bond issued for the Hillendale development. An increase in HUD receivables from the McKinney Program, HCB Mainstream Program, incoming portability vouchers, tenant-based subsidies, as well as county grants and insurance claims. An increase in advances to component units due to timing of the expenses, payment and reimbursements, mainly at the Elizabeth House, Hillendale, Power Park, and Stewarttown, as well as Town Center Apartments and Arcola Towers operating expenses. This increase is partially offset by a decrease in advances at the SHRAC, Waverly House, Tanglewood and Sligo, and Wheaton Venture. And finally, a decrease in unrestricted cash and cash equivalents at some opportunity housing properties, primarily Cider Mill, Metropolitan, Bradley Crossing, Timber Lawn, Brookside Glen, Battery Lane, Diamond Square, Paddington, and Montgomery Arms. There was a corresponding increase in long-term debts, largely due to the issuance of new bonds for the scattered site properties, HOC headquarters, and Hillendale under the multifamily fund, as well as the single-family mortgage revenue bonds. This partially offset by a decrease in mortgage notes and loans payable due to the refinancing of the existing debts of BPC 1 and 2, Scattered Site 2, MHLP 10, and the headquarters, as well as the repayment of Upton 2 RELAC advances from the LIHTC equity. Any questions so far?
One question, on the advances for the SHRAC. Could you explain that to me, please? Could you mention that we are some reduction or changing in what we were advancing for the SHRAC?
So it's merely the timing of the payments of the contractors' invoices. However, we are drawing, the county is sending funds. So it's the timing when we receive the invoices and when we draw the money. However, in the following periods, we are able to get the funding.
I was trying to follow that, what we were paying. Because I thought that there was some kind of reciprocal agreement related to the county and us in terms of certain costs that were being created by the SHRAC. So explain it. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Please turn, thank you. Please turn to page 11, please. The commission has a net income of 222,000 in fiscal year 24 compared to a net loss of 307,000 in fiscal year 23, excluding the unrealized losses on investments recorded under the two bond funds, gain on sale of 10 MPD units in FY 24 and Avondale building in FY 23, as well as capital distributions in FY 23. HOC ended 24 fiscal period with a net income of 1.4 million as compared to a net income of 7.2 million for the same period last year. This is attributed primarily to an increase in HAP revenue and HAP administrative fees income, investment income, development fees, and property management fees income, coupled with a decrease in fringe benefits due to the year-end adjustments in pension and other post-employment benefits expense. The favorable variance is partly offset by an increase in HAP expense, interest expense, maintenance and utility costs, as well as a decrease in rent income, county and other federal grants. The operating revenue increased by 12 million to 316 million this year, compared to 304 million the same period last year. This is largely due to higher HAP revenue and investment income, along with a decline in unrealized losses on investments. Excluding the HAP revenue and unrealized losses, the commission ended with an adjusted operating revenue of 178 million in 2024 and 178 million in 24 and 179 million in 23. The operating expenses was up 14 million from 310 million to 324 million in FY 24, mainly driven by an increase in HAP payments, interest expense, and maintenance expense. If we exclude the HAP expense, the adjusted operating expenses increased only by 6 million to 181 million from 175 million during the previous fiscal year. After adjusting for the gain on sale of assets, the non-operating net revenues amount to 8 million in FY 24, 2 million better than the net revenue in last year. An increase in investment income, non-operating interest income on mortgage and construction loans receivable, and other grants partially offset by an increase in interest expense accounted for the increase in non-operating revenues. A more detailed information are provided towards the end of the packet in the notes to financial statements. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Any questions? Let me say that I find your presentation notes to be good. And I would like to see if you could provide a copy of those to the committee. Okay? Because it gives me a way to go back and summarize and review rather than having to, because these numbers, are moving around in terms of just following them with your presentation. So if you could just provide that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is a matter that does not require us to refer this forward to the full commission. This is for our information for the committee. And so I want to thank you all for the presentation. Do you have any other questions, Jeffrey?
No, not at this.
Okay. With that, thank you for your presentation. And I will now move to the next item on the agenda, which relates to the fourth quarter budget to actual statements for fiscal year 2024. And I will turn to Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, commissioners. As stated in my introduction earlier, we're seeing the impact of moving through COVID-19, and that's the direct reflection of what we're seeing here, but we also incorporate and provide insight in regards to how we are moving along with lease enforcement. I will just note that, of course, with lease enforcement taking up to 9 months, once a unit is vacated, we have to the expenditures around turning those units, as well as marketing and getting those units released, also are going to be reflected in our budget and in our finances in the next couple of quarters. However, we do see improvement, and we also are seeing, as Mr. Getzinger suggested earlier, increase in our commitment and development fees for FY25, which will help offset. And so with that, I will turn over to Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to walk us through.
Good morning, Commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and the viewing public. For the record, I'm Terry Fowler, the budget officer. As was mentioned, I will be discussing the fourth quarter budget to actual statements for fiscal 24. If we can turn to page 17 of the packet. And if we, thank you. The agency ended the year with a net cash flow shortfall of approximately $6.7 million. This equates to 1.98% of our total operating budget, which was $339.3 million, and 4.04% of the adjusted budget when we reduce the bond funds and HAP payments, as well as grants. This shortfall resulted in a year-end negative variance of the $6.7 million, as our budget was projected to balance with a draw from the reserves. The primary causes, as has been mentioned previously, was unrestricted cash flow in some of our properties due to performance, coupled with lower fee income for commitment and development fees, which a portion of that will be shifted into fiscal 25. And these shortfalls were offset by savings in expenses in the general fund. At the top of the chart on the same page, you can see the general fund, which consists of the basic overhead of the agency, ended the period with a deficit of approximately $1.3 million. This resulted in a positive variance of $1.6 million when compared to the projected deficit of almost $3 million for the fund. At June 30, income in the general fund was $5.5 million lower than budgeted, and expenses were $7.1 million lower than budget, resulting in the positive variance. Okay. I apologize, but something has happened to my notes. As was mentioned with the fees, we had several projects that there were shifts in the timing of their fees. The total of those fees is approximately $5.1 million that will shift into 25, and 40% of that is unrestricted. So that will have a positive impact to 25 of almost $2.1 million. We also experienced lower draws from the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund for real estate personnel and pre-development costs in the general fund. The positive expense variance was primarily the result of lapse in salary and benefits, coupled with savings in professional and consulting services, computer software, utilities, maintenance, and saving in capital projects, which resulted in lower transfers from the operating budget to cover the cost of the projects. In addition, the budget for fiscal 24 had a surplus going to the general fund operating reserve, and as a result of performance, that was not made, and that showed as a positive variance in expenses. For the bond funds, both funds experienced expense savings, primarily in salary and benefits, but also lower legal and financial service expenses. And the practice has been that the draws that were not utilized in this current year will be reflected in the budget amendment, and those funds will serve to reduce the draws needed for fiscal 25. For the Opportunity Housing Fund, we've talked about it. President Andrews and CFO Getziger mentioned that there was underperformance in our properties. The key contributors to that were the result of higher vacancy, lower rents at some of our properties, increased maintenance, and bad debt expense. Earlier in June, we apprised the committee of the initiatives undertaken and investments made to reverse the adverse operating trends that were brought on by COVID-19 and how the properties are slowly emerging from that. Towards the end of the quarter, HOC implemented a new scattered site staffing plan, which resulted in immediate uptick in leasing activity. In addition, the lease enforcement has resulted in additional move-outs that make units ready for occupancy. But as President Andrews mentioned, there is a turnaround time and a cost associated with reoccupying those units. The lease enforcement in the fourth quarter had approximately 154 evictions and additional ones in our third party. HOC gained possession of 84 self-managed scattered site units that are being made ready for occupancy. Staff believe the commission, again, has about 2 to 3 quarters because of the timing in the court system to fully get through our lease enforcement, but the future after that will take HOC back to a more stabilized property operations. If we can move to page 18 of our packet, this chart represents our development corporation properties, and it is broken into 2 sections. The top are the properties that are unrestricted and provide cash flow to the agency, and the bottom is the restricted properties. For the top group, they ended the year with cash flow of approximately $2.9 million or $4.2 million less than projected. As stated, the major contributors were the vacancy loss, lower rent potential, and the expenses. Utilities were also higher. However, there is positive notes on that as well, as HOC's maintenance team completed an analysis of water usage at 14 of our properties and identified savings of $193,000 due to overbilling. They will continue to review the balance of our properties, but it is estimated that this can generate approximately $36,000 a month in savings or $432,000 annually. Moving to the bottom section of the report, these are the restricted properties And as you can see from that, they ended with a deficit of approximately 1.75 million, the majority of which came from our RAD 6 properties. The shortfall in these properties will be covered from agency resources, as the properties do not have funds to cover that. But again, on a positive note, management did achieve stabilized physical occupancy at the sites in June of 93.6%, which is up 88% from 88%. And a lot of that is attributed to the new staffing at the properties. The largest segment of the expense variance was maintenance contract, which is related to deferred maintenance and reoccupying of units, and utilities. The utility analysis mentioned previously found approximately 93% of the overcharges were at the RAD 6 properties, and those funds will be received back at the agency in fiscal 25. If we could move to page 19 of the packet. Again, the chart is broken into two sections, with the top being the unrestricted properties and the bottom being the restricted properties. If we could zoom in on the chart to show the total for the top section. As you can see, this group of properties had a negative variance of approximately $3.4 million for the items that we have mentioned earlier. On the bottom section of the chart, these are restricted properties, and this group ended the year with a cash flow deficit of approximately 4.1 million, resulting in a negative variance of 4.2. The majority of this variance is from Cider Mill, which reported a negative cash flow variance of $3.2 million. This shortfall was the result of non-payment of rent resulting in bad debt, higher maintenance and utility costs, as well as security costs at the property. A large portion of that maintenance expense was related to 2 inspections at the property, a triennial inspection and county inspections that resulted in significant needs in the maintenance area at the property. One note on the utility is that the way utilities are handled at Cider Mill is they are centrally billed and then billed out to the tenants. So where tenants are not paying their rent, they are also not reimbursing for their respective utility costs, resulting in higher utility costs at the property. This shortfall at the property will be covered by the agency, as the property does not have sufficient cash to address the deficit. Another property in this group that we will be covering a portion of the shortfall is the state rental units. They had higher expenses and increased vacancy loss, and we are proposing to cover 50% of this shortfall as there's insufficient cash at the property. Are there any questions on operational performance of the properties before I move on to page 20?
Jeffrey.
You know, it's obviously is a well-worn subject. You know, it's been tough looking at the numbers, you know, for a while, and I don't know, it feels like we're always 2 or 3 quarters away, but you know, and it makes clear the need for, you know, the evictions and the lease enforcement to get our numbers back to where they need to be. With that focus, though, on, you know, that we've been talking about here, I guess, I don't know how many people are viewing, but, and this may be more a question for Chelsea or Kareem, but I guess, would you also just talk about, like, all that we have done to work with tenants, you know, before getting to this point, you know, because we're not in the business of kicking people out of homes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And let me just, I'm glad you asked the question. I will say that our agency really has been the most lenient amongst any other property management company or owner in the entire county. We were the last to even enter into the courthouse in terms of moving forward with lease eviction. But the reason being, one, we understand the population we serve, but two, there were resources that were available and deployed. We facilitated the deployment of millions of dollars that were provided, emergency rental assistance programs from both the state and the federal government, worked in partnership with the county to deploy a second round when we were able to fully utilize the first round. We have deployed all of our connections with our nonprofit partners, worked with the county in regards to their program, which helps tenants who are facing eviction if they have up to a certain amount of rental arrearages in helping them clear those out. We also, of course, have our resident services division fully deployed in terms of helping our residents who are having challenges find employment, as well as look at other resources that may be available. We've been extraordinarily lenient. And it's not until most recently that we've taken steps. Even prior to taking steps, there were multiple communication efforts to inform and to prepare our residents for the fact that we actually must move forward with lease enforcement. And we're doing so in a manner that, of course, allows for a level of grace and understanding, and trying to partner with our nonprofit partners that may be able to offer resources. It obviously has impacted our agency in a significant financial way, but we also know our mission. And so the fact that we've been able to maintain our agency financial stability, as well as provide support to those residents who have had challenges moving through this pandemic, we believe that we made the right call, but we also have to weather the storm as we reposition. And our hope is that as we continue to move forward, that residents who hear and see that we're moving forward understand that the importance of getting caught up on their past due rent, but also take advantage of the resources and the connections that we continue to offer in terms of other resources through nonprofits and others that can assist them along the way. But the commission itself has been extraordinarily forgiving, lenient, and supportive of our most vulnerable clients. I would also ask Tim to chime in here. I know that he can also attest to the millions of dollars that we deployed. And I will take a moment and just acknowledge our staff who, even in various divisions, worked outside of hours and duties to knock on doors and to make sure that everyone knew about these resources.
Thank you, President Andrews. Not counting the $50 million that came directly to the county, we put in 6.3 with other sources that we were able to either negotiate from the county or from the state or from other sources. We've covered over $10 million worth of arrearages throughout this.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I mean, and I also appreciate, you recognizing our partners in this state, county, nonprofits. And, I think it's important just, it is, we're taking steps that we need to take, so that we remain financially sustainable and be able to continue with our mission. But, I think it's really important to highlight the efforts that we have made prior, and maybe just to make sure that we mention that at the full commission meeting as well. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
And following up on that point, excuse me. While we're looking at a $6.6 million shortfall, what would that amount look like if it had not been for the actions that have been taken? I don't know how you factor in what the value of all the things we've done is. You've given a $10 million investment, $6 million investment, because if those monies had not been available, then your deficit would have been significantly different, much bigger. it's always a balancing act between, running a business, which is what we do in a way, with our management of our programs. And there's a matter of which, you want to be sensitive to the population who we serve. And I think we've done a good job with that. But there becomes a balancing act when it becomes a point where it could drag the agency totally down. And we've seen that with some of our partners in the region where that's happened. The inability to collect rents, and even when funds were available, sometimes they would not get into the landlords, and things were happening. And we're just fortunate that a $6.6 million deficit only represents 1.9% of our overall budget. Because if we weren't that big or had that large portfolio, we could also be in a much different position. And I think, we've got to look at that as we go forward, because we cannot sustain this level of loss. No way that we can do that. Now, I don't remember where we were at the end of our third quarter, because I know this is the end of the fiscal year summary, but where were we projecting our shortfall to be at the end of the third quarter?
Give me one moment, I can bring that up.
As she's looking at that, you brought up a really good point in terms of where would we be without these resources. We would have a tenant receivable balance, which would be 32% higher and be near $20 million if we were not able to. And that's not counting all of that federal money that passed down to the county and the state. That's just the money that we were able to negotiate. The receivable balance would be 31% higher.
Yeah. And I think, as Jeff made the point, I think it's important when we present this to the full commission that point should be made.
Yeah.
Okay. So while we're looking at this larger shortfall, we could have been without these actions that were taken by the staff and whatnot to a different place. So I think it's important to make that point.
Commissioner Priest, in answer to your question, at the end of the third quarter, we were looking at a shortfall of approximately 7.2 million. So the year end was about a $500,000 improvement from where we were at the end of the third quarter. Again, aligning with what Mr. Getzinger mentioned, we are seeing improvements. It will take some time, but we are on the right track.
Yeah, and I asked that question because if you had told me at the end of the third quarter it was $4.2 million and then it increased to 6.6, that's a different story. Okay. And instead, what we've done through action we've taken, we've reduced that deficit of what it could have been at the end of the third quarter. So again, I think these things where you're making improvements, we need to take credit for those and point that out in the work that's being done by the staff. So it just doesn't look at it as someone who doesn't have that background and knowledge and looks at these numbers and say, oh, they're, but I think it's an explanation that we are put forth in the very beginning of our presentations on these kinds of things. Okay.
So at this time, we do need to take an action to recommend how we will cover this $6.7 million shortfall to the commission on October 9th. And again, we do want to mention that the general fund operating reserve is a key reserve to the agency's operations, and maintaining sufficient reserves is vital for operational viability. As such, the agency has sought to and has successfully increased its reserve in each fiscal year from fiscal 19 to the present, from less than $4 million to over $10.9 million in fiscal 14. Fiscal 24, not sure where the 14 came from. As we detailed repeatedly throughout this morning, we are continuing to see the continuing effects, although we are seeing improvements and we have better trends compared to the last 2 years. However, we have a decision to make. And consistent with last year's analysis, in which staff determined internal sources that could be used to safeguard and improve the agency's general fund operating reserve, this year staff evaluated certain external resources that could be available in order to preserve and potentially improve that reserve. In fiscal 19, the agency took advantage of favorable financing available from the Federal Financing Bank, FFB, and entered into 2 swap terminations for two of our properties, Alexander House and the Lindley. The spread between the FFB cost of the funds and the FHA mortgage rates annually net the agency $630,000 for Alexander House and $1.5 million for the Lindley, which are available to the agency until 2059 when the FFB loan matures. Since 2021, only interest payments were made on the $60 million PNC line of credit advances, and the agency has accumulated nearly $6.8 million from that spread. In order to address the budget shortfall for fiscal 24, staff recommends utilizing the accumulated resources from Alexander House and the Lindley. Repayment would resume in fiscal 2025 second quarter, with mortgage spreads directed to pay down the line of credit balances. If the commission agrees with this course of action, the line of credit is projected to be fully repaid in fiscal 2032 for the Lindley and fiscal 2037 for Alexander House, utilizing excess proceeds generated from both swap terminations. And this timeline would be accelerated should interest rates continue to decline. If the commission does not wish to utilize these resources, we would need to utilize the general fund operating reserve to cover the $6.7 million shortfall. This would reduce the reserve from $10.9 million less the $1.6 million encumbered to balance fiscal 25 to $2.6 million, which would equate to a drop from 6.58% of the adjusted operating budget to 1.55%. For this reason, staff is recommending that we take the alternative action using the surplus proceeds from the swap termination. And we'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
The swap termination only generates how much? $2.3 million, 2.3?
About 2.2, 2.3 annually.
And but the deficit is 6.6.
It is. So since 21, we have been paying interest only on those. And the accumulated resources in there are about 6.8, which could be used to cover the shortfall.
Okay, and then that would restructure the term for repaying on the Lindley.
So it would be on the line of credit. It would push back the full repayment by about 4 years for both of those projects. And then at that time, from the time in which it is fully repaid, the agency would continue to benefit from that revenue to the tune of about 15 to 16 million from that period, which would be 2036 through the life of the FFB loan, which is 2059. So that resource would be available to the agency.
I mean, you're recommending that option because what it would do is still keep intact your reserves.
That's exactly right.
And use this other source alternatively as opposed to draw it down from your reserve account. Correct?
That's correct.
And let me just add, and Tim, if you could also expound if necessary, the terms and as it pertains to when we pay down the line is really an internal decision. It's not that we need to go to the bank and renegotiate or that it will adjust or change anything in regards to a requirement of when we would pay down our line. It really is an internal decision. And so for the last few years, paying interest only was the approach. What we're suggesting is that we take those proceeds attributed to address this shortfall. And then we've provided a timeline in which we could pay down the line, but just wanted to make sure that it's clear. It's not a scenario where we have to go and readjust any terms that we had already agreed to or prolong or pay anything additional. It's really an internal decision that's totally within the control of the commission.
I'm glad you made the point because that was my next question about that.
So are we asking for a recommendation? This, I was just looking at the memo. Have the usual at the end, recommendation. It was in the bullet points. But we are, I guess, I would move that the committee support the staff's recommendation to enter into the two swap terminations.
It wouldn't terminate them, it would just extend the terms of them, correct?
Right. It's really just, we're seeking your support for utilizing the funds from those swap proceeds to address the deficit in FY24 budget.
Yeah.
Mortgage spread, pardon.
Could you give us the specific recommendation that we'll be making forth? What are you recommending? What is
Well,
the staff recommending?
The staff is recommending that we use the mortgage spread, the funds that we have available to address the shortfall in lieu of our standard protocol, which would be to tap into our reserves. So we do not want to utilize our reserves. We have identified another source and we would like the committee's support to use the source that we've identified.
Okay. You want
Motion to support the staff's recommendation.
I second that. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passed. We will recommend this forward to the full commission. I remember the conversation going back when we were doing these swaps. And I remember that very well because that was an approach that was kind of a new approach was taken, and so it's shown the benefit of having done that. So I want to applaud Kayreen, and I know who brought that to us, and on that approach that we took at that time. So I want to acknowledge that.
Sorry. Is this something that will be? Is this just at the committee level, or is it at the? Does this go to the full commission?
This will go full commission.
Okay, yeah. So maybe could you bring some of that up into the memo? I mean, the discussion we just had was sort of buried at the end in the bullets, and it's not highlighted as one of the recommendations.
Yes, and we'll also include a recommendation portion of the memo so that it's clear as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is the recommendation up top, but it's just that we accept the fourth quarter statements.
We'll incorporate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, clearly that the staff had to scrub and try to find some alternative funding sources to cover this shortfall, and without having to really take the money from our reserves. But if we don't correct the situation we are dealing with, we are not going to have too many more options like this available, and we are going to be drawing from reserves going forward in the future. So that's why, to me, it's more incentive to make sure we get this business, what created these shortfalls, resolved during 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we've taken the action by your action to move this forward to the full commission at the next meeting, okay? So I'll now move to the next item on the agenda, which is the third item, which is the first quarter budget amendment for fiscal year 25. So we're ending 24 and we're already looking at a first amendment for 25.
Yes. Commissioners, you'll see that this request is pretty straightforward. It incorporates rolling over funds that weren't used in 24 to continue with various tasks that we need to accomplish in terms of our security system, as well as our budget and procurement software in 25, as well as standing up the budget for Metro Point in FY25. I will turn it over to Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to provide additional details.
Thank you, President Andrews. Yes, if we can turn to page 3 of the packet, As President Andrews mentioned, this budget amendment includes pro forma items that we typically would do at the first quarter meeting in December, which is rolling forward capital projects that were not able to be completed in FY '24. And as mentioned previously in the budget to actuals, taking the excess draws from the bond funds to use those towards the FY '25 operating costs for both the multi and single family bond funds, which will reduce the draws for those years and maintain additional funds in the bonds. The item that has brought us to bringing you this in September is that the Metro Point Limited Partnership, all the documentation to donate that back to the agency because of the end of the 15-year compliance period was not completed till the end of June 2024. And it's so in order for us not to be operating without a budget for a 6-month period, we are bringing this budget amendment now to establish the fiscal '25 budget for the affordable units of the Metro Point development. And you will see that this budget amendment projects a cash flow of approximately $82,000 from those units. And we will amend the projected draw from the general fund operating reserve in fiscal '25 at this time by reducing it by that amount. So if we can go back up, actually down to page 4 of the packet, the impact of this budget amendment, as mentioned, will reduce the projected draw from the general fund operating reserve. You can go slightly lower in the packet, please, to the budget impact. Thank you. It reduces it from approximately 1.6 million to 1.52 million. Our total operating budget would increase from 349.6 million to 350.7 million, which is an increase of approximately 1.1 million. The capital budget would increase from 370.3 million to 371.4 million, an increase of approximately 1.1 million. And so we are asking that the committee support staff's budget amendment that will be presented to the commission for approval at the October 9th meeting. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? I don't have any either. The explanation you just gave relative to discussion around Metro Point and the fact that because we took the action earlier about assuming the Metro Point ownership because of the 15-year expiration period. So we've done that. That didn't come across as clearly in the memorandum as it did in your explanation. Okay. So if you could just take a look at that and make sure that's very clearly defined in the write-up of this specific recommendation, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I get a motion to recommend this forward to the full commission?
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. So ordered. Thank you. The last item on the agenda for today is the discussion of the request to write off uncollectible tenant accounts receivable. And I will turn to our president.
Yes, commissioners, this is also a pro forma request that we bring to the commission on a quarterly basis. And as you can see, we are requesting that we write off $378,221 in uncollectibles. And I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, to provide additional details.
Thank you again, President Andrews, commissioners. As President Andrews alluded to, this is a pro forma item. We come each quarter to request certain write-offs. And again, yes, the write-off is $378,221, almost all of which were attributed to either lease enforcement or its effect in terms of folks abandoning or vacating their units. This brings the total for FY '24 to almost 1.4 million. And as I spoke about this at the top of the at the meeting, this is a significant increase from last year in which we had 221 $300,000, and in FY 22, $349,000, and that is because of our effective lease enforcement strategies in order to get paying tenants. The next anticipated write-off for former tenant uncollectible accounts receivable balance will be for the first quarter of FY 25, which will cover July 1st through September 30th, 2024. Staff requests that the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee join its recommendation to the Commission authorizing the write-off of uncollectible tenant accounts receivable balance of $378,221. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
You have any questions?
No, no questions.
With that, can we get a motion to recommend this forward to the full commission for
So
action?
moved.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. So ordered. There's no other business to come before the commission, so at 9:59, I adjourn the meeting of the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.